Soft jazz hums through the air, blending with the low murmur of conversation. Chandeliers cast a golden glow over the exclusive restaurant, where wealthy guests sip expensive wine, indulging in whispered conversations about stocks, luxury vacations, and the latest designer trends. This isn't just a restaurant, it's a place where power and prestige are on full display. The entrance door swings open gently, and a woman steps inside. Sandra Bullock. She's dressed in a simple yet elegant outfit. Nothing flashy, no diamonds, no extravagant fur coat, just quiet confidence. She walks in alone, her posture relaxed, unaware of the eyes that immediately assess her. Behind the front desk, a waiter, tall and sharply dressed, watches her approach. A smirk tugs at the corner of his lips. Something about her doesn't sit right with him. Maybe it's the simplicity. Maybe it's the fact that she isn't flaunting her wealth like the usual clientele. He's worked here long enough to recognize those who belong, and in his eyes, she doesn't. She reaches the podium and offers a polite smile. "Table for one, please." The waiter barely conceals his amusement. He leans forward slightly, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. "Madam, our menu is quite refined. Perhaps I could recommend a place more suited to your taste." Sandra blinks, momentarily taken aback. "I'm sorry." He gestures toward the door with feigned politeness. "There's a charming little diner just a few blocks down. More budget-friendly." A soft chuckle ripples through a nearby table where a well-dressed couple sits, their amusement barely hidden. The man adjusts his cufflinks, watching with interest, while his companion raises an eyebrow, waiting to see how this unfolds. Sandra exhales quietly, pressing her lips together. She's been here before, not in this exact restaurant, but in this moment, the moment where someone decides her worth before even knowing her name. She doesn't argue. She doesn't make a scene. Instead, she simply nods, taking a step back. The waiter mistakes her silence for submission, his confidence growing. "I mean," he adds, grinning now, "I can check if the kitchen has a children's menu. Maybe something simpler for you?" A low chuckle spreads across the room. The guests, who had been absorbed in their own conversations, now turn their attention toward the quiet woman being humiliated at the front of the restaurant. The waiter folds his arms, satisfied. He's put her in her place. But what he doesn't notice, what no one notices, is the man sitting in the corner, his fingers resting lightly on the stem of an untouched wine glass. His expression unreadable, his presence unassuming. Keanu Reeves watches everything. And in a moment, everything is about to change. The soft clinking of silverware pauses. A hush spreads through the restaurant, the laughter dying down as if the air itself has shifted. The waiter, still wearing his smug grin, doesn't realize the atmosphere has changed, doesn't realize that someone is watching him with an intensity sharp enough to cut through the arrogance in the room. From the corner, Keanu Reeves slowly places his glass down. His movements are unhurried, deliberate. He doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't need to. "That's enough." The words slice through the air, calm yet commanding. The entire restaurant freezes. The rich couple who had been chuckling moments ago suddenly stiffen. The waiter, mid-smirk, falters. The confidence in his posture flickers like a candle caught in the wind. He turns toward the voice, his expression shifting between confusion and irritation. "Excuse me, sir." Keanu doesn't respond immediately. Instead, he leans forward slightly, elbows resting on the table, his dark eyes locked onto the waiter's. His voice remains steady, but there's something in it, something heavy, something final. "You don't know who you're talking to." A ripple of tension moves through the room. A few guests exchange glances. The waiter swallows, suddenly feeling the weight of the attention on him. He glances at Sandra, then back at Keanu. His smirk returns, weaker this time. "With all due respect, sir, I believe I do. This is an establishment for a certain class of clientele." Keanu tilts his head slightly. "A certain class?" His tone remains neutral, but the shift in energy is unmistakable. The waiter straightens, trying to regain control of the situation. "Yes, sir. We cater to..." Well, people who understand fine dining. Silence. Thick, uncomfortable. The kind that stretches too long, forcing people to confront the weight of their own words. Then, in a movement so fluid it feels effortless, Keanu rises from his seat. He doesn't tower over the waiter. He doesn't need to. His presence alone is enough to make the air in the room feel heavier. He adjusts the cuff of his jacket, his expression unreadable. "You made a mistake," Keanu says quietly. The waiter lets out a nervous chuckle. "Sir, I don't think—" "No," Keanu interrupts, his voice never rising, never breaking its calm rhythm. "You don't." The waiter's face pales. Around them, the other guests watch in tense silence. No one dares to move. No one dares to look away. Sandra remains seated, her fingers lightly tracing the rim of her water glass. She doesn't interfere. She doesn't need to. She's seen this before, the moment arrogance meets its reckoning. But Keanu isn't done yet, and what happens next will change everything. The waiter shifts uncomfortably, his hands gripping the edge of the podium as if grounding himself. His confidence is cracking, but he forces a laugh, trying to maintain control. "Sir, I'm not sure what the problem is here. I was just trying to guide the lady to a more suitable option." Keanu's gaze remains steady, unreadable. He tilts his head slightly, as if studying the waiter like a puzzle he's already solved. The room remains eerily silent, the clatter of plates and murmurs of conversation now non-existent. Everyone is watching. "Tell me something," Keanu says, his voice as smooth as the expensive whiskey resting on the nearby table. "What's the most expensive dish on your menu?" The question catches the waiter off guard. He hesitates, blinking. That would be the platinum steak, sir." Keanu nods slowly. "And how much is it?" The waiter clears his throat. $5,000. A few guests murmur in surprise, some already guessing where this is going. The rich couple from earlier smirks, waiting for Keanu to flaunt his wealth. But Sandra, she sits perfectly still, her lips pressed together. Because she knows, this isn't about money. Keanu reaches into his jacket and pulls out a sleek black credit card. With a single flick of his wrist, he taps it against the podium. "I'll take 2. Silence. The waiter blinks, his throat bobbing as he swallows. "T2? Keanu's voice doesn't waver. "One for me, one for her." He gestures towards Sandra without breaking eye contact with the waiter. A ripple moves through the restaurant. The mood has shifted again. This isn't just a meal order, this is a statement. The waiter fumbles with his notepad, scribbling the order in shaky handwriting. "Of course, sir. I'll have the kitchen prepare—" Keanu raises a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "And bring a 3rd plate." The waiter furrows his brow. "For who, sir?" Keanu finally allows a small smirk to appear. "You." The restaurant is dead silent. The waiter's face drains of color. Me?" Keanu slides the credit card back into his pocket. "You serve expensive food every day, don't you? You must know what it tastes like." A few guests lean forward, eager to see where this is going. The waiter stammers, "Sir, I can't—" Keanu's expression remains calm. "Why not?" The waiter's hands tremble slightly as he glances at Sandra, then back at Keanu. I'm not allowed to sit at a customer's table." Keanu tilts his head, amusement flickering in his eyes. "Why not?" The waiter shifts his weight uncomfortably. "It's not meant for someone like me, sir." Keanu lets the words hang in the air for a moment, then gives the faintest nod. "Exactly." The waiter stiffens. A hush spreads across the restaurant, the weight of Keanu's words crashing down like a tidal wave. A few guests widen their eyes, realizing what just happened. The very thing the waiter told Sandra, that she didn't belong, that this place wasn't meant for her, has now been thrown back at him. The heat from the chandeliers suddenly feels suffocating. The once smirking guests shift uncomfortably in their seats. And the waiter? He just got a taste of his own arrogance, but Keanu isn't done yet, and what happens next will leave everyone speechless. The kitchen doors swing open, and 3 plates are carefully placed on a silver tray, each holding a perfectly grilled platinum steak, garnished with gold flakes and served with crystal-stemmed wine glasses. The waiter watches as another server carries them toward the table, his face pale, his hands clenched into tight fists. He doesn't dare look at Keanu. The other guests sit frozen, their earlier amusement long gone. The rich couple, once entertained by the humiliation of a nobody, now watches with uncomfortable expressions. A few guests glance toward Sandra, some with quiet recognition, others with shame creeping into their features. Keanu pulls out a chair, not for himself, but for the waiter. He gestures toward it. Sit. The waiter swallows hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. His voice is barely above a whisper. Sir, I really can't. Keanu raises an eyebrow. You can serve a $5,000 meal, but you can't eat one. The tension in the air thickens. The other servers have stopped moving. The manager stands frozen near the bar, and the guests wait, some eager, some terrified, to see what happens next. Sandra, still seated, runs a finger lightly along the rim of her water glass, watching. She hasn't said a word, hasn't demanded justice. She doesn't need to. The waiter hesitates for a moment longer, then, under the crushing weight of silence, he finally lowers himself into the chair. The sight alone is enough to send a ripple through the restaurant. A waiter, sitting at a table meant for the elite. The second the chair creaks beneath him, he realizes what's happening. Keanu has turned the entire situation around. Just minutes ago, he was the one deciding who was worthy of being here. Now, with a single order, Keanu has flipped the script, placing him in the very same position of discomfort, of judgment, of not belonging. The waiter stares down at the plate in front of him, unable to move. His hands rest awkwardly in his lap, his entire body tense. Sir, I don't deserve this. Keanu picks up his knife, calmly cutting into his own steak. He doesn't look up when he responds. Neither did she. A visible shudder runs through the waiter's body. A few guests murmur among themselves. Some avert their eyes, as if ashamed to be witnessing this. The reality of the moment is sinking in. Keanu finally sets his knife down, looking directly at the man across from him. Tell me something, he says, his voice softer now, but no less powerful. Would you have treated her differently if you had known who she was? The waiter's fingers twitch. This is it, the real question. Sandra lifts her gaze, watching him carefully. The entire room is waiting for his answer. He opens his mouth, but no words come out, because he knows the truth, and so does everyone else. But Keanu isn't finished, and the next words out of his mouth will change everything. The waiter's throat tightens. He feels the weight of 100 eyes pressing down on him, waiting, judging, just like he had judged her. His mind races for a way out, for an excuse, but there isn't one. The truth is clear. His fingers tighten around the edge of the napkin in his lap. I didn't know, he finally mutters, his voice barely above a whisper. Keanu exhales quietly, leaning back in his chair. His expression doesn't change, but there's something in his gaze. Something that makes the waiter feel even smaller than he already does. And that's the problem, isn't it? The words cut deeper than any raised voice ever could. The waiter lowers his head, his once polished confidence shattered. He had spent the entire evening judging a woman he didn't know, assuming her worth based on nothing more than the simplicity of her presence. Now, he's the one being judged. A few guests shift uncomfortably in their seats. Some of them had laughed along with him earlier. Now they stare at their plates, suddenly finding them far more interesting. The rich couple who had been entertained by the whole thing. The man clears his throat, adjusting his cufflinks, avoiding Keanu's gaze. The silence is suffocating. Sandra finally moves. She sets her napkin down beside her plate, then lifts her gaze to the man who had humiliated her just minutes ago. You didn't think I belonged here, she says softly. No anger, no arrogance, just quiet understanding. The waiter swallows. I didn't mean... She tilts her head slightly, cutting him off without needing to raise her voice. Would you have treated me differently if you had known who I was? The waiter freezes. That's the real question. A murmur spreads through the room. Someone at a nearby table pulls out their phone, their fingers moving quickly. And then, "Oh my God!" a woman gasps, her voice breaking the heavy silence. That's Sandra Bullock. A ripple of realization moves through the restaurant. The whispers turn into a low hum of shock. Phones come out. The people who had ignored her, the ones who had laughed, suddenly recognize the woman they had dismissed as a nobody. The waiter's breath catches. His head snaps up, his face pale. Sandra Bullock, the Oscar-winning actress, the woman who had starred in some of the biggest films in Hollywood, a legend, and he had treated her like dirt. Keanu watches the waiter's reaction carefully. He doesn't smirk. He doesn't gloat. He simply waits. The waiter's entire body tenses. The room feels smaller. The chandeliers above suddenly too bright, the murmurs too loud. His biggest mistake wasn't just insulting a customer, it was insulting the wrong person. But Sandra isn't done yet. She leans forward slightly, her voice calm but deliberate. "But that's the thing, isn't it?" she says, her gaze locked onto his. "It shouldn't matter who I am." Silence. The waiter's lips part, but no words come out. Because now, he finally understands. But understanding isn't enough. And Keanu Reeves, he's about to make sure this lesson is one the waiter and everyone in this restaurant never forgets. The room feels different now. The once buzzing restaurant filled with laughter and whispers is eerily silent. The weight of Sandra's words lingers in the air like an unshakable truth. The waiter, who had moments ago felt untouchable in his arrogance, now sits frozen, his face drained of color. Sandra stands, pushing her chair back with quiet grace. She doesn't gloat, doesn't smirk. She simply looks at him, giving him the chance to grasp the full weight of his mistake. "It's not about who someone is," she continues, her voice steady. "It's about how you treat people when you think they're nobody." A heavy pause. The lesson hangs in the air, undeniable. The guests who had laughed earlier now seem smaller, avoiding eye contact, pretending they weren't part of the scene. Even the rich couple who had enjoyed the waiter's mockery shift uncomfortably in their seats. Keanu rises from his chair. He adjusts his jacket with the same effortless coolness he's always carried, then turns to the waiter. His voice remains calm, but there's something deeper in it. Something that makes the moment feel final. "You should be thankful for this lesson," Keanu says, his words cutting through the silence. "Not everyone gets a second chance." The waiter's hands tremble in his lap. He nods, unable to meet Keanu's gaze. He doesn't speak. There's nothing left to say. Sandra gives him one last look. Not of anger, not of resentment, but of quiet disappointment. Then, without another word, she turns and walks toward the exit. Keanu follows, his footsteps slow and deliberate. The restaurant watches them leave, the weight of the moment sinking into every guest, every waiter, every person in the room. No one stops them. No one speaks. The message has been delivered. Outside, the city hums with life, the streets glistening under the soft glow of streetlights. A light drizzle begins to fall, tapping against the pavement in a rhythmic, gentle pattern. Sandra exhales, a quiet breath of amusement. "You didn't have to do that," she says, glancing at Keanu. Keanu chuckles, stuffing his hands into his pockets. "Yeah," he says with a small smirk, "but you would have done it for yourself." She looks at him for a beat, studying him. The silence between them isn't awkward, it's filled with understanding. "You always do this, don't you?" she muses. Keanu smirks. "Do what?" "Stand up for the underdog." He tilts his head slightly, as if considering the thought. Then, with a small shrug, he simply says, "Isn't that what we're supposed to do?" Sandra lets out a soft chuckle, shaking her head. "You know, it's funny," she says, looking back at the restaurant. "People only care about who you are when they realize what you can do for them." She turns back to Keanu, her expression softer now. "But the ones who really matter, they treat you with respect from the start." Keanu nods. And those are the people worth keeping. A silent understanding passes between them. Then, without another word, they step forward, walking into the night, leaving behind a restaurant full of regretful people, and a lesson that no one inside will ever forget. Because tonight, they didn't just expose arrogance. They reminded the world that true worth has nothing to do with status and everything to do with character.